This is Bone Chillers to disturb your dreams. Dare to join us? Click subscribe, ring the bell. But remember, we cannot guarantee your safety from the nightmares that await. Prepare to be thrilled, chilled, and filled with a sense of dread you'll find nowhere else. Welcome to the darkness. We've been waiting.
The Desolation of Echo Lake. When I rented a cabin on Echo Lake, I saw it as the ideal setting to pen my new article. Its Montana location meant dense woods, serenity, and a landscape to inspire. I was never fond of urban distractions, so the seclusion felt like a gift. The cabin was rustic and picturesque. The first evening was flawless, with a sunset painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. I started writing with a fervor. But around midnight, I stumbled upon an old leather diary. Curiosity got the better of me. The diary belonged to a man named Elias, an early settler of the area. He described the breathtaking beauty of the land, the crisp air, and the pristine waters of the lake. However, as the entries progressed, a recurrent theme started emerging: the shadow in the forest. I saw it again today, the shadow, moving swiftly between the trees, always just out of focus. Each time I try to chase it, it disappears. And the cries, they chill my bones. The more I read, the more intrigued I became. Entries described it as an elusive figure with antler-like protrusions on its head. But the most harrowing details were the noises. Cries that seemed like a mixture of human agony and something more primal. Skeptical, I chalked it up to the isolated life of a settler affecting his psyche. But 2 nights later, I heard it. A mournful, chilling cry echoing across the lake. My heart raced. Maybe it was just an animal, I tried to reassure myself. Morning unveiled a new mystery. Large footprints surrounded the cabin, bigger than any animal native to these woods could make. The reality of Elias's tales began to dawn on me. Was I sharing this land with something ancient and malevolent? The weather forecast had warned of snow, but I hadn't expected it to be this intense. Within hours, the cabin was surrounded by a thick blanket, making it impossible to leave. Each night, the cries grew louder, more desperate. The nights were restless. The cold seemed to penetrate the walls. Every shadow made me jump. Every creak of the floorboards made my heart race. The diary became my only solace. I hoped that Elias, having lived through this, had some clue about dealing with the entity. But his entries grew more frantic, more desolate, and ended abruptly with the words, "It calls me the Wendigo. It's not just a legend, it's real and it hungers." My provisions were running out, and the snow showed no signs of relenting. I tried to focus on my writing, but the fear was overwhelming. One evening, as the sun's last light faded, I saw it. It was just a silhouette against the dimming horizon, but the antlers were unmistakable. The Wendigo. Panic overtook me. But then, an idea formed. The local tribes had legends, tales of confronting such spirits. Perhaps if I could communicate, show it I meant no harm, I might survive. The night was the coldest yet. I built a fire outside, the flames flickering, casting long, eerie shadows. Sitting cross-legged, I began to chant. The words were from an old native song Elias mentioned in his diary. The wind carried my voice across the lake, and for a moment, everything was still. Then, from the thick woods, it emerged. Tall, skeletal, with hollow eyes and those unmistakable antlers. Fear froze me, but I continued to chant. It approached slowly, its form flickering like a mirage. And then, unexpectedly, it began to mimic the chant, its voice a cacophony of whispers. Hours seemed to pass, and as the first light of dawn approached, the Wendigo retreated to the forest, its cries now subdued, almost mournful. I don't know if it was appeasement or an understanding, but I felt I had confronted an ancient spirit and survived. The snow began to melt, and with it, my ordeal at Echo Lake seemed to come to an end. The day I left, I returned the diary to its hiding spot with my own entry added, a warning to any who might stay at the cabin, a testament to my encounter. The Wendigo might be a legend, but legends often root themselves in truth. In the heart of Montana, Echo Lake holds secrets, whispers of the past. And though I had faced one of its darkest legends, I knew the lake had more tales waiting to be discovered. I drove away with a heavy heart, the cries of the Wendigo still echoing in my ears, a constant reminder of the thin line between myth and reality.
Montana, fated trails. It was meant to be a retreat, an escape from the monotony that had engulfed my daily existence. The sprawling wilderness of Montana was said to be therapeutic. It promised solitude, and as an avid hiker, the dense forests and untouched terrains were an irresistible call. As the days turned into weeks, I delved deeper into the forest. On one such evening, while following a path that seemed to be an old animal trail, I discovered an eerily pristine clearing. The ground was etched with symbols, ancient and inscrutable. It was evidently a tribal circle. The urge to investigate further almost overpowered me, but my instinctual wariness kicked in. I settled for watching from the shadowed embrace of the trees, curious to see if this place still bore any significance. It wasn't long before a soft hum permeated the stillness. From the opposite side of the clearing, twin sisters emerged. At first glance, they were strikingly beautiful, with blonde hair cascading like golden waterfalls. They began to dance, their movements synchronized, hypnotic, a dance that seemed as old as time itself. But as the dusk deepened, the enchantment started to wane. Their forms began to shift and warp, alternating between their initial beautiful forms and grotesque, nightmarish figures. Their skin flowed like molten wax, stretched thin to reveal a sinewy underlayer, their faces contorted into expressions of pure malice. Panic gripped me. Every fibre of my being screamed at me to flee. But just as I was about to, one of them, the one with a distinct scar tracing her cheek, turned her head sharply, her gaze finding mine. In that fleeting moment, her eyes weren't human. They were vast black voids that seemed to consume everything they beheld. I sprinted, adrenaline fueling my flight. I camped at a different location that night, trying to convince myself that what I had seen was a figment of my imagination, an effect of the dimming light. But the next day, as I tried to venture further, hoping to put distance between myself and that accursed circle, I stumbled upon it again. And there they were, the twins, their eyes on me, waiting. The forest, which once seemed welcoming, now felt like a maze. Trails looped back on themselves, paths led to dead ends, and every time at the center of it all was the tribal circle with the sisters. Desperation and dread became my constant companions. I tried marking trees, using my compass, and even following the flow of rivers in a bid to escape, but every attempt was in vain. It became a sickening routine. Hike, find the circle, flee, camp, and repeat. Sleep was hard to come by. In the veil of night, their whispers echoed through the trees, singing ancient lullabies filled with dark promises. They were always nearby, those twins, watching, waiting. I was their entertainment, their plaything in this vast, labyrinthine forest. One evening, in a fit of exasperation, I confronted them. "What do you want from me?" I cried. The one with the scar stepped forward, her form shifting between the beauty and the beast I had come to dread. "You trespassed," she hissed, her voice a chilling blend of innocence and malice. "Now you're bound to the forest, to us." In a desperate bid for freedom, I thought back to the tribal symbols etched into the ground. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to break this bond. I began drawing them in the dirt, trying to replicate what I'd seen. The twins watched, intrigued. "Looking for a way out," the scarred one mocked. "There isn't one." But as I completed the last symbol, a brilliant light flashed. The twins recoiled, their forms disintegrating momentarily. Seizing the chance, I ran, not looking back. It felt like hours, maybe even days, but the forest eventually began to thin. And then, almost miraculously, I found myself on a familiar trailhead leading to the outskirts of the forest. I didn't stop running until civilization was in sight. Montana's wilderness had shown me both its beauty and its horrors. Weeks turned into months, and the traumatic experience began to feel distant. But every now and then, in the hush of a quiet night, a soft hum would reach my ears, a chilling reminder that I was once a guest in their labyrinth, and the haunting possibility that they might still be watching, waiting.
Slenderman, the hiker's diary. The gentle rustle of the wind through the trees, and the chirping of the birds had made our hiking trip feel like a pleasant escape from city life. My friends and I had ventured into a remote forest for a week-long excursion. On our third day, we discovered a small, semi-buried leather-bound diary near a dilapidated campsite. The pages, though browned and brittle with age, held the neat handwriting of its previous owner. May 1st, beautiful forests. The serenity is unmatched. Saw an unusually tall figure in the distance. Probably a trick of the eye. We huddled closer, curiosity piqued. The next entry read, May 2nd, there's something odd about this forest. Saw that figure again. Tall, faceless. Maybe just a fellow hiker. But something feels off. Each page grew more desperate. The entries became frantic scribbles. May 4th, it's watching me. I feel it everywhere. In the rustling leaves, the silent gaze from a distance. I tried speaking to it, but it just stands there. The faceless entity. By the time we reached the last few pages, I felt a chill despite the afternoon sun. May 6th, I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see it standing at the edge of my tent. The slender, faceless man. I need to leave. The last entry made our hearts race. May 7th, it's too late for me. Whoever finds this, leave immediately. It's always watching. Don't let it find you. Alex laughed, brushing it off as a joke. Someone's idea of campfire tales, I guess. The rest of us tried to laugh along, but a sense of unease had settled. That evening, as we pitched our tents, we joked about the slender man. It was easier to mock than to admit we were spooked. But in the dead of night, a cold wind gusted, causing our tents to rattle. Through the thin material, I could make out a tall, elongated shadow. Frozen in fear, I held my breath, waiting for the shadow to move. It didn't. Dawn seemed like a distant dream, but eventually, the sun began to lighten the horizon. I mustered the courage to unzip the tent, half expecting to be met with a nightmarish figure. Instead, I was met with the sight of our campsite and the surrounding forest. Over breakfast, I hesitated to bring it up. But as soon as I mentioned it, Lily and Max confirmed they'd seen the shadow too. Only Alex remained skeptical. Shadows play tricks in low light, he reasoned. Determined to push our fears aside, we continued our hike. But as the forest grew denser, so did the atmosphere of dread. Each rustle, each sudden bird flight made us jump, and then, there it was. The tall, faceless figure, standing at a distance, watching us. We froze, our previous bravado melting away. Alex, who'd laughed it off, looked as pale as the rest of us. Without a word, we began retracing our steps, the weight of our backpacks forgotten as adrenaline took over. Every so often, one of us would glance back, only to confirm our worst fears. The figure was following us, always at a distance, but unmistakably there. We lost our way multiple times, but the presence of the slender man drove us forward. As evening approached, we stumbled upon the dilapidated campsite where we'd found the diary. The realization hit us hard, we were going in circles. Lily, panic evident in her eyes, whispered, "The diary. We need to leave it back. Maybe that's why it's after us." Without wasting a moment, I placed the diary where we found it. We waited, hoping the figure would vanish, that our nightmare would end, but it didn't. Night began to descend, and with it, a thick fog enveloped the forest. Visibility reduced to mere feet. Hand in hand, we continued to walk, hoping against hope to find a way out. As the hours dragged on, exhaustion took over. At some point, I realized Max was no longer with us. His hand had slipped from mine, and he was gone. We called out, our voices desperate, but the dense fog swallowed our cries. All that remained was an oppressive silence. With tears in our eyes, we pressed on, the forest seeming to grow darker and more twisted with every step. And then, as abruptly as our ordeal had started, we emerged. The forest edge, the road, and our parked car came into view. We didn't waste a second. Clambering in, we drove away, not daring to look back. To this day, we don't talk about our hiking trip. Max was never found. Every so often, when I close my eyes, I see that tall, faceless figure, standing in the distance, always watching. And the worst part? Deep down, I know it's still out there. Waiting. Watching. Always. Slenderman whispers in the woods. The dense woods had always been a subject of intrigue in our town. Legends spoke of a Slenderman-like figure who'd take people away, only to bury them deep within its heart. Despite the tales, or perhaps because of them, my friends and I decided to camp there one summer. Setting up our tents in a small clearing, we gathered around the campfire on the first night. As the logs crackled and the orange flames danced, we began sharing ghost stories. Jake, with his knack for dramatics, recited a tale of the tall man from the woods, saying that he'd leave hints about his victims, toying with their minds before finally taking them. I remember laughing, commenting on how cliché it sounded. However, the first hint of something strange occurred on the second night. Matt, one of our group, was nowhere to be found in the morning. His tent was neatly zipped up, his sleeping bag undisturbed. Panicking, we searched the immediate vicinity but found no trace. That night, huddled in my tent, I heard the softest whisper just outside the fabric. Cold and deep, where roots seep, that's where he sleeps. The voice was delicate, ethereal. My heart pounded so loudly, I thought it would burst. The following day, Jenna was gone. There was no trace of her, just like Matt. As night approached, the rest of us were on edge. And once more, as I lay wrapped in my sleeping bag, a whisper slipped through the night. Silent she lays, where darkness plays, lost in a maze. I couldn't sleep after that. I kept the tent zipper slightly open, hoping to catch a glimpse of the intruder. But I saw nothing. The next morning, Jake and Sarah, the last of my friends, were missing. I was alone, surrounded by these hostile woods that seemed to be guarding a dark secret. Feeling isolated and panicked, I considered leaving, but I had to know what happened to my friends. The sun set, and as darkness swallowed the landscape, I sat up in my tent, flashlight in hand. The whisper came earlier that night. Hurry and see, near the old tree, that's where they'll be. Mustering all the courage I could, I stepped out and shone my flashlight towards the woods, scanning for any signs. As the light beam moved, it fell upon a tall figure standing a few meters away, half concealed by the trees. He was thin, dressed in a black suit, his face obscured by shadows. In his hand was a leather-bound diary. With a start, I realized that the diary looked exactly like mine, one where I'd penned down my fears, thoughts, and secrets. My body went cold as I remembered an entry I wrote years ago about my recurring nightmare. A tall man in the woods taking away everyone I loved, leaving me alone. He slowly opened the diary and began to read out loud. My words, my thoughts echoed back to me, mocking me with their familiarity. As he reached the last page, there was a note I hadn't written. I am a reflection of your darkest thoughts. Fear gripped me tighter. What have you done with my friends? I screamed, my voice shaky. The figure tilted his head. They're here, he whispered, pointing towards the woods. Compelled by a mix of dread and determination, I walked deeper into the forest, the silhouette guiding me. After what seemed like hours, we reached an old, twisted tree. Beneath its ancient roots were freshly dug holes. 4 of them. They're waiting, the voice echoed, chillingly calm. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed. Sobbing, I mustered the courage to ask, why? Why are you doing this? He leaned closer, his breath cold against my ear. You brought me to life with your fears. I am born from your thoughts. Despair consumed me. The weight of the realization that my own mind had conjured up this horror was suffocating. I had, unintentionally, manifested my deepest fears. Without another word, the figure melted into the darkness, leaving me amidst the chilling silence of the woods. The next morning, I was found by a search party, delirious and traumatized. They never found any bodies, nor did they find any evidence of my friends ever being there. Some say I went into the woods alone and imagined it all, but every time I close my eyes, I hear those whispers, reminding me of the price of fear. And somewhere in the depths of those woods, the tall man waits, a reflection of our darkest thoughts. Alien in the street. The morning sun painted the rooftops gold as I strolled through the streets of my hometown, enjoying the serenity. Birds chirped, and kids played in the distance. But as I walked further, an eerie quietness began to envelope the surroundings. The playful laughter faded, and even the birds ceased their songs. Rounding the corner of Elm Street, I came upon the town square, normally bustling with activity, but today, it was oddly deserted. The only soul in sight was a man standing in front of Henderson's bakery. He was unlike anyone I'd ever seen. Pale grey-skinned with shriveled sinewy flesh, his dark green eyes bulged grotesquely. Curiosity, mingled with concern, pulled me closer. Maybe he was unwell or lost. But as I neared him, he fixed his unsettling gaze upon me. His lips barely moved as he whispered, "Your town has been chosen. By sunset, there will be none left. Only me, and others like me." Chills ran down my spine. The blood drained from my face. Was he threatening me? The town? What did he mean? Not waiting for a reply, he turned away and started walking at an unnaturally fast pace. I decided to follow him, keeping a safe distance. He stopped in front of houses, touching the doors with long, bony fingers. At each house, I saw a faint green glow emanate from the entrance. Was he marking the houses? What was he doing? Suddenly, a child's scream echoed through the air. Racing towards the source, I reached Mrs. Whitman's house. The door was ajar. I entered cautiously to find her and her daughter, Lucy, huddled together. They looked terrified. "There are more of them," Lucy cried, pointing out the window. I peered out and saw more figures with the same grey skin and bulging eyes, all walking methodically and touching houses. The entire town seemed to be paralyzed with fear. "We need to leave," I whispered to Mrs. Whitman. Before sunset, quickly, we left the house and began rallying people, urging them to gather at the town hall. News of the strange man's prediction and the haunting figures spread like wildfire. Panic ensued. By midday, a majority of the townsfolk had congregated in the town hall. Murmurs filled the room as we tried to piece together what was happening. Mr. Douglas, the town's historian, stood up. "There are old tales," he began, "of creatures from beyond. They come to towns that have been chosen, marking houses and taking souls. By sunset, the town becomes theirs." His words only intensified the panic. "We must fight," shouted Mayor Peters. "We can't let them take our town." But how do you fight the unknown? Hours flew by as we fortified the town hall, preparing for the worst. We watched from the windows as the sky turned a fiery orange, signifying the approach of sunset. The grey-skinned figures grew in number, circling the hall, waiting. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. A ghastly green glow illuminated the room. One by one, people started to vanish. A heart-wrenching scream pierced the air, then another and another. I clutched onto Mrs. Whitman and Lucy, but within moments, they too were gone. I was alone, surrounded by those bulging dark green eyes. "You can't escape. Your town was chosen," whispered a voice. Mustering all the courage I had left, I lunged towards a window, shattering it. The sharp edges cut my skin, but I ignored the pain and ran as fast as I could, away from the town hall, away from the silent town. I ran till the moon was high, exhaustion threatening to overtake me. Finally, collapsing by a stream, I let sleep claim me. The next morning, I awoke to the soft chirping of birds. Everything seemed normal. With a heavy heart, I made my way back to town, hoping against hope. The town looked unchanged, but it was silent. The eerie quietness was deafening. Houses, shops, streets, all stood still. No kids playing, no birds singing. Just silence. The townsfolk were gone, and in their place, statuesque figures with grey skin and dark green eyes stood, watching. They didn't approach or threaten. They just observed. Tears streamed down my face as I realized the devastating truth. My town, my home, was now theirs. And I was the sole survivor of the silent takeover. With one last look at what once was, I turned away. I didn't know where I was headed, but I had a story to tell, a warning to give. Before another town fell silent.
Thank you for watching, and remember, the darkness awaits. Until our paths cross again, stay fearful and stay subscribed.